type into the live chat and ask questions that you have, and I will answer your question as best as I can. Okay, well, I tell you what, those of you who are online, if you got questions to ask, please type in your questions. I just finished my J2 class, so let me run off to the toilet first for a moment. I come back, then I start answering your questions. Okay, hey, no questions Nobody got anything to ask Oh, have suddenly now come in already. Okay, so first one. There's an essay question. Explain why the presence of imperfect information in health insurance market results in government intervention. Okay, so everybody who's looking at the screen now can see the questions being typed there. So if this essay question for 10 marks, so this MF question, MF type, well, it's kind of like a type 1 and type 2 question because they give you health insurance market and then they give you government intervention, right? So intro, main body. Then what you do for this kind of question, first thing you do is you skip the intro, split the main body into R1 and R2. So R1 will be explain one source of market failure due to imperfect info. Explain another source of market failure due to imperfect info. Now, this question very strictly requires you to do within the health insurance market. So for both points, it must be health insurance. For both points, it must be imperfect info. So how then do you answer this question to get enough scope, right? Then I would say R1, choose under consumption due to consumers underestimate the private benefits of health insurance. That means MPB perceive is lower than MPB actual. Then the other version I want to choose will be adverse selection under asymmetric information. So this would be a better scope to answer the question. However, I suspect whoever is setting this question would also accept R1 adverse selection, R2 moral hazard, right? I think they would also have accepted that. Okay. Is that Javen? Han Xuanren. All right, so I hope I answer your question. Okay, wait, you have a follow-up question. If my answer were adverse selection and moral hazard, how would the diagram for each paragraph look like? So don't have diagram, right? For more adverse selection and moral hazard, both don't need to draw diagram, both explain in words can already. But I would prefer not, personally, I would prefer not to do adverse selection and moral hazard. I would prefer to do underestimation of private benefit, because in the market, there will be some consumers who don't perceive fully the value of having health insurance, right? So then that one will have diagram. Then the second one is adverse selection. Okay, so I'm going to move on. If I didn't fully address your question, please follow up with another question. Okay, next, for the stockpile release helping to reduce shortage caused by price ceiling, if I did not mention the stockpile, can I suddenly start mentioning it? How do I link it? You didn't have to say it right at the start, right? You can just say that one of the policies that the government can use to prevent the price increase or to maintain affordability of the good, right, is to impose a price ceiling. Then you can explain how this price ceiling, for it to be effective, will be set below the equilibrium, and this will result in a shortage. Then you say then you just add it in now. Assuming that the government of the country has national stockpiles of such goods, right? Then the government can then release such stockpiles into the market to clear the shortage. So this way, the price ceiling will be able to maintain the affordability without causing disequilibrium in the economy. Yeah, without causing disequilibrium in the market. You can just bring it up at that point. Okay, I hope that answers your question. Okay, so I now have a question from Chelsea. Chelsea wanted to ask question 1A. So because those of you at home cannot see 1A, right, I will copy out the question. Using demand and supply analysis, explain two factors that determine the extent, right, of fall in government spending when diesel subsidy is reduced. All right, so the question has a preamble that says Malaysia government spending on diesel subsidy alone has increased tenfold from RM 1.5 billion dollars in 2019 to RM 14.3 billion in 2023, straining the government reserves. As such, the government has decided to reduce its diesel subsidies. So as a result of this diesel subsidies being reduced, what affects the extent of the government subsidies? Okay, so first and foremost, right, thanks for asking this question, Chelsea. A lot of students, right, I don't think understand what is the nature of, a lot of people don't understand what is the nature of a subsidy. Come, everybody, let me explain this. In Malaysia, when the government imposes gives a subsidy, how does it actually work? If the demand and supply for subsidy, for diesel, tell us that the market equilibrium price is based on intersection and the price is too high. Then what the Malaysian government might do is say, oh, that's too high a price. I'm going to set a P-max here, and this allows the price from rising too high. Then you have a quantity demanded and a quantity supplied that is greater than one way and the other, right? This result in a shortage. What is the actual quantity sold? In absence of government intervention, if there's no government intervention, the actual quantity sold will be equals to QS. However, in Malaysia, just like in most countries, when the government set a price ceiling like this, they actually set the actual quantity sold to be at this point. So they basically tell the firms, right, sell at P-max, but sell as many units of the good as consumers are willing and able to buy, right? So that means sell this quantity, QD. Then the sellers are saying, wait, I'm not prepared to sell this amount. If you want me to sell this QD, you have to pay me this price, right? You have to pay me a much higher price at P1. So then the government say, okay, what will it take for you to be willing to sell this amount? Then the sellers will say, well, I need this amount, right, of subsidy per unit. I need to be paid this vertical distance per unit. So then what is the total subsidy? The total subsidy to the government will be this yellow color rectangle. So this will be the total subsidy to be paid by the government when your country, when Malaysian government gives a subsidy on diesel, they're actually not referring to just subsidy, they're referring to this area. So using the supply and demand expenditure, demand supply analysis, explain two factors that determine the extent of the fall in the government when diesel subsidies are reduced, right? Then how does the government reduce the diesel subsidy, right? The way the government reduces the diesel subsidy is actually by raising the P-max to a higher P-max. So by raising to a higher P-max, then this is the QD prime or QD1. Then the subsidy becomes this blue color area is the new subsidy given. So what are the factors that affect this? Then it will be how much is the subsidy decrease? That means by how much will the government raise the P-max, number one. And number two, right, how big is the fall in the quantity? So the first factor is by how much P-max is raised. And number two is price elasticity of demand, which determines how much QD fall to QD1 will be. That will be the two main factors that determine this. Okay, so Chelsea, that will be how you answer question A. Where is this from, by the way? Is this from your school exam? If it is, then I think this is a really killer question, very difficult question to answer, actually. Which year is this, Chelsea? Last year promo. Do you have answer key given by the teachers? I suspect the answer I gave is totally different from the answer your teachers are looking for. I suspect they are looking at I suspect they are using a very, very simplistic view. Okay, so everybody pay attention to the, okay, I'll just reproduce this page so I can erase this to make space. I suspect the Diamond High teachers have a different interpretation of the subsidy. I think they might be choosing a very simplistic view that the subsidy of diesel, so they have a diesel market, this is original supply, original demand, this is the price. Then they have a subsidy, so S0 plus subsidy. So the per unit subsidy is S dollars. So new equilibrium is here, Q1, Q0, P1. So then your subsidy, the new subsidy, with the subsidy is now P1 plus S. So this is the area representing the subsidy given. So they're taking it as very simple indirect subsidy. So if they were to reduce the subsidy to, let's say, S0 plus smaller subsidy, then this will be the new equilibrium. So Q2, P2, and P2 plus S. Then this red color thing will be the smaller subsidy that they are giving. So what are the factors that affect this? Then the answer will be the magnitude of fall in subsidy, right? And how much the quantity will drop, right? So it's still PED. So the answer is still the same, but the model within which you explain this change in the subsidy, change in the total expenditure by the government changes based on whether you assume the real world case where the government subsidy on petrol is actually, or diesel, is a fixed price plus subsidize the difference, or it's just a simplistic indirect subsidy. I suspect the Dhamma teachers were looking for the simple version, which is just like this. But nonetheless, it still makes the question hard, right? So do you understand, do you guys understand how to determine the subsidy? Oh, wait, Chelsea sent me the answer, is it? Yep, correct. R1 is the same. R2 is same, correct? Why they never draw diagram? Yeah, sorry, let me check this message. All right, so anyway, the answer is, I think the answer should be correct, just that it's the graph they never draw. So there are two versions of the graph, this version and this version. Okay, so while we are on this question, let me explain a little bit more since we had this chance. How to analyze the subsidy, the government spending on subsidy, on an indirect subsidy. Okay, so first let's draw a simple subsidy. So if this was the market equilibrium, demand and supply intersection, this is the market price, this is the market quantity. If the government give a subsidy of S dollars, then the new market supply goes to S1, which is S0 plus the subsidy per unit. The subsidy per unit, we will call it S dollars. Then the new equilibrium occurs at E1. This is at P1. Now, to make it simpler for you, let's imagine this was originally $10 and small s is $3. If the government subsidized $3 per unit, the market equivalent price will drop. By how much by it drop by? It may not drop, it won't drop by $3 full dollars. Maybe it dropped to $9, for instance. So the consumers actually enjoy $1 benefit because it's the firm passed on the $3 subsidy partially to the consumer. Then where is the other $2? The other $2, right, is actually from P1, you go up to what is called P1 plus S, right? And this is actually $12. Can you see the vertical height between $12 and $9 is exactly $3? That's the subsidy per unit. So the government actually pay out a subsidy per unit of $3 times Q1 number of units. So this whole area represents the government spending on the subsidy. So to find out what is the amount government spend is P1 plus, from P1 you add the S dollars to get P1 plus S, this vertical height multiply by the horizontal distance, which is the new quantity. That is your total subsidy bill. Now, if you go for taxes, then what's the opposite? How about tax revenues? Then tax revenue is just the opposite. So you have supply, demand, equilibrium, PQ. So let's again give it a value of $10. If the government impose a tax, right, $T equals to $3, then your new tax, you supply S1, it will be equals to S0 plus $T. Then new equilibrium, price P1 will be like maybe $11. Then at $11, how much does the firm receive? The firm actually gets $11 per unit, but then the firm must lose $3 to the government, right? So P1 minus T, this will give us $8. So the total tax revenue of the government will be $3 times Q1 units. Then this will be the tax revenue of the government. So this is how you explain the changes in tax revenue and changes in subsidies for the government. Okay, so if you want, you can screenshot this. I will PDF this later and send out anyway on the Telegram if you need. All right. Do we have any other questions? There are some more. Oh, there are lots more questions. Why is the screen not loading? Sorry, Qing Ying, is it Qing Ying? Could you go through productive efficiency for firms? Sure. So, firm level productive efficiency. First, we draw a firm's diagram. So, output per week, vertical axis. Strictly speaking, should be price, revenue, cost, but we are only drawing the cost curve, so you can just write cost if you prefer. Then the graph we need to draw here is the LRAC. So anytime we talk about any efficiency concept, it must be a long run concept. So the curves must be long run average cost curve. This point here, the lowest point corresponds to what is called the minimum efficient scale. We're not interested in that point here. We are interested in that. Suppose there is an output level called Q0, and the Q0 is, right? Suppose Q0 is the firm's chosen level of output. Now, how does a firm choose the level of output? Based on its objective, right? So maybe it's the profit maximizing output, maybe it's the profit satisfying output. We don't care, right? As long as this is the firm's level of output it has chosen, then AC0, what is AC0? AC0 represents the lowest long run average cost the firm can incur for this chosen level of output. Right, so if the firm is operating on its LRAC curve, it is producing this level of output at the lowest possible average cost. Right, so then the firm is productively efficient. Then when is a firm productively inefficient? Is when a firm is producing at Q naught output, but incurring a cost equals to AC naught prime. So this is when the firm operates above its LRAC curve. Then it is not producing at the lowest possible average cost that it can produce. So then this is called productively inefficient. All right. Okay. Now I have a question. So, Qing, I hope, I think I assume that's Qing, right? QY. If I didn't fully answer your question, please follow up with more questions. Okay, so Teresa, you texted me a question earlier. Discuss how Zambia's monopolistic control over sugar market might impact allocative efficiency and consumer surplus. Okay, I don't know what this question really is asking about because there is no preamble. So Teresa, I hope you're listening. I'm going to assume that there's a preamble, and the preamble is talking about how in Zambia the sugar market is controlled by a monopoly rather than the global sugar market has where Zambia is the monopoly, because I don't think that's a reasonable way to interpret that Zambia has a monopoly over the global sugar market. So I'm going to interpret this as in Zambia, the country of Zambia in Africa, the sugar market has a monopoly. Then what is the impact of this on consumer welfare, and what's the impact of this on allocative efficiency? All right, so if that was the case, then I'm going to draw the market for sugar in Zambia, where this is assuming it's one monopoly firm. So price, revenue, cost in dollars, output of sugar per week. So you have AR, MR. This graph here is MC, but I have to call this LRMC instead of MC. Why? Because the moment I talk about efficiency, right, the moment I need to talk about efficiency, it has to be a long-run concept. So allocative efficiency is a efficiency concept. It's efficiency, so it must be a long-run concept. So at this point, profit maximization will be at Q naught, while the price is at P naught, right? For completeness, I need to draw in my AC curve, right? And again, I need to label my AC curve LRAS. Please note that even though your school teacher may have taught you that the AC curve is not important to draw, please draw it anyway, right? Please draw it anyway, because without the AC curve, you actually cannot confirm that Q naught is profit max. Now, then next, the next key point comes at where is allocative efficiency. To identify where is allocative efficiency, you need to bring up the condition for allocative efficiency, and that is when P is equals to MC in the long run. So where does this occur? This occurs at the intersection of AR curve and LRMC curve. So it occurs at this point. So P equals to MC occurs at this point. So once you have reached this point, you can label this as QS, stands for social optimum, right? This is also the point for allocative efficiency. So now you can show that the profit maximizing output Q0 is less than social optimum QS. This results in allocative inefficiency. To explain this allocative inefficiency, then now you need to mark out the 3 points on the diagram that shows the deadweight loss. So to show deadweight loss, then we need to compare area Q0 BC QS versus area Q0 AC QS, pretty much the same way that we would do positive externality positive externality or under consumption due to imperfect information. You have a under production of this good, right? So due to monopoly power, you end up having allocative inefficiency, and the allocative inefficiency is measured by the deadweight loss area ABC, which is explained by Q0 BCQS minus Q0 ACQS to get you the deadweight loss. So that's the first answer to this question about allocative inefficiency. Now for consumer surplus, it's a little bit trickier. So I hope you got the answer here. Wait, let me remove the comment so you can see the bottom of the page. All right, so if you need to screenshot this page, as I said, I will send it as a PDF later to Telegram, but if you want to urgently have this, you can screenshot this. So this is in relation to Teresa's question about Zambia's sugar market has monopoly power, how this affects allocative efficiency. So now I'm going to move into the second part, consumer welfare. Okay, so let's clone this page. Okay, so for consumer welfare, it's a little bit different. So let me erase this stuff first. So for consumer welfare, I'm going to draw two diagrams. Okay, watch carefully. The first diagram I'm going to draw is I'm going to use blue. This is the monopoly diagram, price, revenue, cost. And output per week. So I have my AR curve. I have my MR curve. And I have my MC curve of the monopoly, LRMC curve. Profit maximizing point occurs at this intersection. Let's call this QM, M for monopoly, and PM, price of monopoly. Now then, I'm going to now draw a second graph using green color. This second graph is just called price and quantity sold per week. Quantity of sugar sold per week. Sorry, quantity sold per week. So I'm drawing a demand supply diagram. So my demand is equals to this. Okay, here's where it gets tricky. I'm going to draw the supply as this. What do I mean by this supply? So this is a supply curve in a DDSS model, which assumes PC industry, right? So what I'm assuming now is, I'm assuming that this, suppose it was not a monopoly, suppose the Zambia sugar market is not a monopoly, but instead made up of many small firms selling a homogeneous product. So this is a perfectly competitive market. Then the marginal cost curve of every firm summed together in this PC market is called the market supply curve. Then this market outcome is called market equilibrium. This is the output of a PC industry. This is the price in a PC industry. Then now I compare consumer surplus. If this was in fact a PC market, the total consumer surplus will be this yellow color area. But because now it's a monopoly, the consumer surplus is only the pink color area. So there is a decrease in consumer surplus equal to this purple color area. So this will be the reduction in consumer surplus given the monopoly, right? This is in contrast with a PC market that we assume otherwise, right? That means if it had been a PC market, then this would be the consumer surplus will be the yellow color one, and if it was monopoly, it's the pink color one, and the difference is the purple shaded area. Okay, so Teresa, I hope that answers your question. Next, Blue NGC. I don't know who is this. Oh, I know this. I know who is this. Right. How, if I do not have enough time to finish writing, to write finish essay, should I write out overall structure without going details, or throw in details if I have time later? Sorry, there's no good answer to this question, Charlie. You make sure you finish in time, right? You have 2 days to get yourself ready to be in time. Don't write to be familiar with how to say what you need to say. Rehearse. So how to rehearse between now and the exam, right? It's not your hand. Your hand speed is not the problem. It's you familiar or not familiar with how to express what you need to say. So you need to 默写, you need to 背, right? Like be able to verbally say out the whole paragraph. You can, if you can eloquently and in a very 流利 kind of way, right, to say out the whole paragraph, right, verbally, right, means you can write, right? You can speak it, it means you can write it. So there is no good answer for this. Write out the essay structure without the details, you won't get any marks on, right? So if you write out the whole paragraph, but then you cannot complete your essay, you will still get very low marks. Which one you get less? I guess incomplete essay get very low marks. Correct structure with no details, then get no marks. So then I think write the paragraph. No matter what, still just try to write the paragraph. All right. Okay, Chelsea. How do you explain market dominance lead to market failure? So if you have your question banks with you, you can refer to the market failure 2009 question A, which asks you to explain with market example how market dominance lead to market failure. So in this essay, the R1 is unpack market dominance, right? And so basically use an example in the real world. So here you can either choose oligopoly or monopoly, right? But choose monopoly are easier, right? And then talk about how high price setting ability leads to AR curve that is downward sloping. So what you want to do is to, at the introduction, provide the theoretical grounding for price setting ability so that your AR curve has a negative gradient. So once you have this AR curve with a negative gradient, then from there, you can also claim that your MR curve also has a negative gradient twice as steep. So you set this up. Once you have set this up, then your R1 and R2 will be explain why this is allocatively inefficient. So how to explain this? why is allocatively efficient? Then as we did earlier, right? So you have LRAC to show that this is Q naught. This is social optimum QS based on P equals to MC condition, right? And explain your dead weight loss area, right? So area ABC. So now remember, you have to draw your LRAC curve in as well. Make sure you draw it with a supernormal profit. Right, so this is your AC, so the firm earns some supernormal profit. Now, what's your R2? Your R2 will be explained why this could, not is, why this could be. Compared to allocative efficiency is for productive efficiency, why this could be productively inefficient. To explain how we can have firm level productive inefficiency, the firm can end up earning higher, incurring a higher average cost than it ought to. Now, this requires two supporting arguments. What are the two supporting arguments? Number one, what might cause inefficiency or what might cause productive efficiency? Why the firm doesn't shut down? In spite of being productively inefficient. All right, so a lot of times when students explain this, they R2, they don't talk about both reasons. They only explain the second reason that, oh, because firms have high barriers to entry, they are able to earn supernormal profit. Because they are able to earn supernormal profit, right, they can afford to be inefficient. That means inefficient, they also won't close down. That explains the second point, right? That explains the second point about why the firms don't close down. But it doesn't give us any reason as to why they might be inefficient to begin with. So to explain the first point, you have to argue like, oh, but firms with high market dominance, like monopolies, right, tend to be large firms, right? And large firms tend to face this problem called X inefficiency, where they don't operate at the lowest point of the AC curve because they have some information failures or information inefficiency within the large firm. So you give some reason for why this might happen in a real world for big firms. And then second reason is, okay, so what if it's inefficient? Why does the firm not shut down? Then the answer is because the high barriers to entry allow them to enjoy high supernormal profit in the long run, so that even if they are inefficient, they don't typically get kicked out of the market. All right. Next, Kirsten asks, what is MES for? So MES, right, stands for minimum efficient scale. Scale here refers to size of a firm measured by output level. So minimum efficient scale is what is the minimum size of a firm the firm needs to get to be efficient. So minimum efficient scale is the lowest size of a firm, in this case output, right? The lowest output level a firm needs to be at in order to reach its lowest LRAC. So diagrammatically, if you have a saucer shape LRAC, then where are your efficient scales? Your efficient scales are all the output level. So these are all your ESs, right? Your efficient scale are all the output level that give rise to the lowest average cost. Then this particular output level, this is called your MES, your minimum efficient scale. The lowest output level you need to get to the lowest average cost. This is for saucer shape. But if you have a U-shaped LRAC curve, then you only have one ES, right? There's only one ES, and that ES is your MES. That's your minimum efficient scale. So that is what MES stands for, and what is like, how do we interpret it in the graph? Then the question that Kirsten is asking is, then know already got what bloody use, right? Like, how do I use this information? So how to use MES? Right. So MES together with the size of market demand help us determine the number of firms in the industry. For example, right, in an industry where the MES of one firm is 1,000 units, but market demand, right, is that at this kind of price, roughly this price level, right, is 10,000 units, right, per week that consumers wish to buy. Then this suggests to us the market, right, cannot have one firm. One firm, right, producing 1,000 units, right, will be efficient. But if one firm try to serve the whole market, right, the amount of these economies of scale, the firm will have to incur, right, to reach the output level to serve 10,000 units a week, right, will be so high, right, that a second firm enter the market will immediately drive out this firm already. So that means the industry cannot have one firm serve the whole market. So then what about when there's two firms? Then two firms produces only about 2,000 units. Three firms produces 3,000 units. So roughly how many firms will there be? There will be about 10 firms in the market to serve 10,000 units demand, right? So MES tell us what is the optimal size, roughly what's the optimal size of one firm. Market demand will then together with the MES tell us roughly how many firms you need. So if the industry's demand is 100,000 units per week, and the market, each firm, right, each firm is only 1,000 units per week they can produce at MES, then you need 100 such firms, right? But what if the firm's MES is 10,000 units per week and the market demand is 10,000 units per week? Then this industry can only support one firm. Then that will be a monopoly, right? Or in fact, that's called a natural monopoly, that the industry cannot support two firms in this case. So the way to use MES is to look at the market demand relative to MES. So just to do an extension point, a natural monopoly is a situation where the MES is so far away, right, that we haven't even have chance to do the minimum point yet, and there's no more space, right? Market demand, right? Market demand is not big enough to go that far. So in this kind of situation, the LRMC curve and the LRAC curve are both continuously downward sloping. So MR curve and AR curve will not have a chance to reach the turning point. So cannot even draw MES because not enough demand to reach so far away. Right? If you zoom out on this picture, then I will get LRAC curve maybe U-turn at some point, right? So LRMC curve will probably have to cut through here. Right? This is your LRMC, this is your LRAC. But your demand, right, is only up to here, right? So AR, MR. So if you were to focus on, let's say, just this portion of the demand of the diagram, right? Then what you will get is, you will get a diagram that looks like this natural monopoly diagram, right? This is exactly the natural monopoly diagram. ARMR and a continuously falling ACMC, right? So the part that, the part that the turning point is being covered, right? Is being covered by the demand curve doesn't exist, right? At that point. So this is just the natural monopoly diagram. Okay, so Kirsten, I hope that answers your question. Okay, wait, where's my cursor? Javen, you mentioned this morning that the second most popular MF question is explain rational decision making and discuss whether free market always is always efficient, right? What are the essay structure for this? Okay, so it depends. Given the essay structure varies, so there are generally, roughly speaking, about 4 kinds of RDM questions. So let's give an acronym first. RDM stands for rational decision making, right? So RDM questions, the first variation is explain how consumers and producers make rational decisions, right? So this is a standard RDM question. So what you do is you split your essay into intro and main body. So what you do in the intro, you unpack RDM, unpack rational decision making, by firstly defining rationality, right? And you explain the framework for decision making known as the marginalist principle. Right, so you define rational decision making, rationality, then you define marginalist principle. Then inside your R1 and R2, in R1, you will use the marginalist principle. So TMP stands for the marginalist principle to explain how a consumer decides whether or not to buy a good and how much to buy if he or she decides to buy. So there are 2 decisions that consumers have to make: buy or don't buy, and if I buy how much. Producers, same thing, use the marginalist principle to explain how a producer decides whether or not to produce a good and how much to produce if it decides to produce. Right, so this is the structure of this essay. Right, so far can follow? I haven't finished yet. I'm introducing to you this idea first. Okay, if you are familiar, if you are okay with this up to this point, right, then what I need to do now is to introduce you to the 25-year series, right? So let me find the 25-year series handout. All right, so if you can screenshot this screen, right? If you can screenshot this screen to, or at least remember what is R1, what is R2. R1 is explain, use TMP, the marginalist principle, to explain how a consumer make 2 decisions: buy or don't buy, if buy how much. Then R2 is produce or don't produce. If produce, produce how much. Now, once you have this remembered, right, then we are going to look at the 25-year series, and we're going to look at the year 2015 question. No, 2018, 2021, sorry. We're going to look at 2021 question. Oopsie. All right. Oh, wait, you can't see my 2021 question. Give me a moment. Remove this. Oops. Share screen. Is this the correct one? No, this one. Okay, so I hope you can see my share screen now. All right, so the 2021 question, explain how economic theory suggests, so this economic theory refers to the marginalist principle, suggests consumers act rationally to decide whether or not to buy a bicycle. So they give you the context of a bicycle, but the decision is whether or not to buy. So instead of buy or don't buy and buy how much, right? The examiner for this question decide to simplify for you to say R1, just decide buy or don't buy. Then R2, right, is to decide for producers what level to produce. That means they skip the first level decision. That means they don't need to say producer produce or not. It's just producer decide how much to produce. Right, so this would be the example of how you would answer this kind of question. Okay. Now hang on, not done yet, Javen. So this is the question. This is one type of question that says how rational decision making is done for consumer. Now let's go to another question. Let's look at 2013 question. The 2013 question is a very similar question that says explain what is involved in what rational decision making. So what is involved? Then the marginalist principle is involved in rational decision by both consumers and by firms. So now in this question, right, how are you going to answer this question? How does consumer use marginalist principle to make decision? Consumer will have to decide whether or not to consume a good, and if consume how much. Firms will have to decide whether or not to produce a good. If produce, then produce how much. So there are 4 decisions in total, right? But wait, do I have enough time to write 4 decisions for 10 marks? It seems like too much work to be done in the 20 minutes. So what you are supposed to do here, right, is to pick one of the 2 questions. So suppose I say consumers, let's focus on their decision on whether or not to buy rather than buy how much. Producers, let's not focus on whether or not to produce, but assume they would produce, then decide how much they produce. So then I'm turning this question into 2021 style question. Consumer decide buy or don't buy. Producer assume they buy, focus on how they decide on how much to produce. Then what example or good do I choose? Up to me, right? So no example given, I choose my own context. Then what if I choose bicycle? If I go and choose bicycle, right, then I have effectively turned this 2013 question into a 2021 question again. So the 2013 question, essentially, it can be answered like the 2021 question, but you can also don't use bicycle. You can change it to another context. But consumer, focus on buy versus don't buy. Producer, focus on produce how many units. This is the approach to this kind of question. So if your school were to set RDM question, then I would suspect this would be the highest chance type of question. Now, there are other variations of this question that I think is less likely to appear for J1 promo exam. I wouldn't want to dwell too much on this at this moment. So I will just prepare you for this kind of TMP question. All right. Again, follow up with more questions if you feel that any part you don't understand. Okay, next I have how, Chelsea, how do you can you explain how do we use consumer and producer surplus in question? Okay, so hang on, let me, oops. Let me go back, set up my thing again, share screen, window. All right, so to answer Chelsea's question, how we use consumer and producer surplus in question. Normally, in a demand supply essay, we will not talk about consumer and producer surplus unless the question explicitly asks for it. So the question might ask, explain how this event affects consumer surplus. Explain how the event affects consumer surplus. So normally we'll use it that way. The other situation where we might use consumer and producer surplus is in a high order effects of event demand supply question, where the examiner asks, discuss how these events might affect consumer and producer. Then you will say, how does the event affect consumer surplus, and how does the event affect producer surplus? So, like for example, just now there was a question. Was it you who asked the question? Oh no, that was Teresa's question, right, about the Zambia's sugar market, right? They asked specifically, right, they 指名道姓 asked, how will this affect the consumer's welfare? Then that one you can talk about consumer surplus. Right, so consumer surplus is usually talked about only when they specifically ask for it. All right, next, how does M&A benefit consumers? So M&A, for those of you who don't know, M&A stands for mergers and acquisitions. So one way that M&A can benefit consumers is that when firms merge or acquire one another, they become larger firms. They will have more, they are likely to enjoy more economies of scale. When you argue this point, then you need to give some specific example of IEOS that the specific firm in that specific industry can enjoy. And then go on to talk about how the firm can pass on these cost savings to consumers in terms of lower prices, and the lower prices would increase consumer welfare. So that's one way M&A can benefit consumers. Another way M&A can benefit consumers is that with a larger market share, the firm is able to earn more supernormal profits. With higher supernormal profits, the firm is able to then direct more resources into R&D to give consumers overall better products over time, right? So product innovation or process innovation. The firms use process innovation to come up with a cheaper method of producing a good, which then translate back into cost savings for consumers. So these are the two main ways that M&A can benefit consumers. So recap, one is IEOS, second one is more innovation. All right, next. How do you explain the impact of a subsidy on consumer and producer surplus? Okay, good. Kirsten's question is, how does an indirect subsidy affect CS and PS? Okay, so first let's draw a diagram. Initial demand and supply equilibrium, then a subsidy S1 equals to S0 plus subsidy. The vertical distance of the subsidy is, let's call it S small s dollars. So because of this, the new market price drops to P1, the new equilibrium quantity rises to Q1, and the subsidy per unit S dollars is added to P1, so I get P1 plus S dollars. Right, so P1 is the new price paid by consumers. So consumers pay a lower price now. P1 plus S is the new price received by producers. Now, why producers receive a different price as what consumers pay? Consumers pay P1 dollars. Producer receive P1 dollars from the consumer, but the government additionally gives S dollar to the producer. So every unit the producer get P1 plus S. So now how to analyze the effect on consumer and producer surplus? So let's start with the consumer surplus. What's the initial consumer surplus? Based on the definition, what the total amount that consumers are willing able to pay and the amount they actually pay. This is the consumer surplus triangle. Where is the new consumer surplus? The new consumer surplus triangle will be the maximum amount consumers are willing able to pay and the amount they actually pay. So this trapezium will be the new consumer surplus. So the increase in consumer surplus will be this triangle, this trapezium, sorry. So that is the increase in consumer surplus. Now, producer surplus. What was the initial producer surplus? The initial producer surplus, let's use purple, light purple. Initial producer surplus, the price that producers receive and the minimum price they were willing to accept. This is your producer surplus. Now the new producer surplus. What is the new price producer receive? P1 plus S. Subtract the minimum price they would have been willing able to accept, which is the supply curve. This is the new producer surplus. So where is the gain in producer surplus? The gain in producer surplus will be this green color area. So this will be the gain in PS. The consumer surplus here will be the gain in CS. All right, so I'll leave the screen here for you to take a screenshot if you need for gain in producer surplus. I'll give it like 5 seconds for you to take the screenshot. So gain in CS. All right, then this is the gain in PS. Okay, done, Kirsten. If again, as usual, if I don't fully answer your question, please follow up with more. Right, so next, let's go to Hansel. Hansel's question is EOS. So there are 2 ways to show EOS, or IEOS more precisely. So output per week cost. So normally, we will draw the LRAC curve as a U-shaped graph. To show the IEOS, we are basically showing that as the firm's output level increases, let's say from Q0 to Q1, then the firm's long run average cost falls from AC0 to AC1. This is shown as a movement along the LRAC curve. Alternatively, there's another way to show, right? So first, let me draw an AR curve, MR curve. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a SRMC curve, short run marginal cost curve. Profit maximizing quantity is here. Profit maximizing price is here. So I draw an AC curve here as well. SRAC not. Now, if I have IEOS, then I can draw it as a SRMC curve going at a lower position, and SRAC curve also occur at a lower position. So profit maximizing point is now here, Q1. Profit maximizing price goes up. Oops. Sorry, that looks a bit ugly. Profit maximizing price goes up to here. Right, so then Q1 and P1 changes, right? So I have a lower price and higher quantity. So the firm passes on some of the cost savings to the consumers in terms of lower prices. Right, so this is the way you can show SRMC goes to a lower position, SRAC goes to a lower position. Now, why does that happen? That's actually because, right, somewhere here, right, there is a SRMC MC 0, SRMC AC 0. Then here we have a SRMC 1, SRAC 1. Right? So when your firms go through a movement along the LRAC curve, it is your SRAC and SRMC that is shifting down as well. So depending on what you're trying to explain, if you're simply trying to explain that the firm enjoy IEOS, then you can just draw the left-hand graph to show this. But if you're trying to show that how when a firm enjoys IEOS, it results in the firm passing on cost savings as a lower price, then you will draw the right-hand diagram that you see on the screen. So depending on what is the thing you're trying to illustrate. Okay. All right. So, any more questions? Okay. So at the moment you have no new questions. I will entertain Teresa's question on standard of living for macro side. So any of the Hwa Chong people, if you happen to be here, other than Teresa, also please take note, or NY people also can. So Teresa's question is, whenever I come across SOL question in CSQ, so it's a SOL question in case study question, there is always a type of question that asks, to what extent, Teresa, to what extent is spelled as T-E-N-T, not T-N-D, to what extent is the given information sufficient in determining increase in SOL? Okay, good. You're right. This is a very popular question. What kind of question is this, and what is the answering technique? This is a HOTS question, right? This is a HOTS question at A level, but only for case. But a special question type for A case study is called a HOTS sufficiency of data question. So this kind of question, right, is basically assessing the extent to which some given data is able to support a certain opinion. Now, everybody pay attention, not just Hwa Chong and NY people. This kind of question can also appear in non-macro question. They can also ask, we've done this before, Teresa, when we did case study previously, about how the data in figure 1 supports that the changes in relative prices of bus fare, train cost of operating a car, and train fares affect how consumers choose the mode of transport, right? So this kind of question, right, the approach is always to use a TAE structure. So the thesis will be, in what way does the data support, right? In what way does the data support the viewpoint we are trying to argue for? Antithesis is, why might the data that we look at not be able to fully support? That means, what assumptions are we making about the data when we say this data support this? Antithesis is, why might those assumptions not necessarily hold? Or why this data could be caused by some other factor, some other reasons other than the thing that we think is happening. So you must have an antithesis argument and say, why might the data not be enough as an evidence to support the viewpoint? Then evaluation is, given that we are not 100% sure whether this data support, what's your opinion? What do you think is the likelihood, right, of this data being able to support the viewpoint? So it's a TAE structure. Now, how many marks is this question going to be? It can go as low as 3 marks. That means something very, very simple to say, look at this data, one piece of data, to what extent does it support? Then antithesis, why it support, why it does not support, and do I think it supports? So then it's 1, 1, 1, T, A, and E. It can go as high as 10 marks, which is very rare. It will be unlikely that your school will ever set 10 marks for this. So the highest schools will go for is 8 marks. If it's 8 marks, right, then your answer will be a 3, 3, 2. 3 marks for why it supports, 3 marks for why it don't support, 2 marks for evaluation. Right, so in this kind of situation, then you might give one reason why it supports. Okay, actually there are 2 ways to do this. If it's an 8 mark, right, let me revise. If it's an 8 marks, then you can be 3-3-2, 3 mark thesis, 3 mark antithesis, 2 marks evaluation. Or 8 marks can also be split into 2 mark thesis, 2 mark thesis, 1 mark antithesis, 2 mark evaluation. So it's 2, 2, 2, 2. That means explain 2 ways or 2 pieces of data, 2 things in the data that can support the viewpoint, 1 thing in the data that doesn't. Of course, it can be a T, A, E. So 1 T, 2 A's and E. So in one way, what is one way the data can support? What are 2 ways the data does not support? And what's your overall evaluation? So you can 8 marks, you either go a 3-3-2 or a 2-2-2-2 structure. But it may not be so high, it may be 6 marks. If it's 6 marks, then what you do is just TAE, 2-2-2. Right? Then if it's 3 marks, then it's just 1-1-1. Okay, so that's how you would answer your question, Teresa. All right, where am I? What's the next question? So I settled answer already. Okay, next. This is Javen again. Could I trouble you, so polite, Javen, to explain what the marginalist principle is about again? The marginalist principle is a theoretical framework that tells us that all economic agents make rational decisions at the margin. Now, what exactly does this mean? So, for example, when applied to consumers, the marginalist principle states that a rational consumer whose aim is to maximize utility will consume a good up to and including the unit where MPB is equals to MPC assuming for simplicity that the consumer possess perfect info. So this is what the marginalist principle statement is about. That if I'm a rational consumer and I'm going to consume a good, how much will I buy? I will buy up to the point where the extra benefit I get from that last unit must exactly match the extra cost to me of that last unit. This is actually something that tells us that the sunk cost fallacy is a sunk cost fallacy, right? That means I don't care how much is the cost I have incurred previously. My only concern is this next unit. Is it going to give me more benefit or is it going to cost me more for that next unit? If consuming one more unit give me $10 of satisfaction, but it costs me $8 to consume it, then I will have a net gain of $2. Then the answer is do or don't do, rationally do, right? Assuming I have the power, I have the financial ability to spend, I will spend, right? Assuming I have the resources to pay for this good, I will go for it, right? Then, but if let's say at one point, right, so the next unit, then if I consume again, is now give me $9 of satisfaction, but it costs me $9 to buy, then I will still do it, right? But the next unit, right, if it costs me $10 to buy, but only $8 of satisfaction, then I will have a net loss of $2. Then marginalist principle will tell us that consumers will not buy the good. So marginalist principle is the way that explains to us why we will always keep consuming more until the point where NPV equals MPC. And for the firms, if you apply to the firms, then you replace the words in this to be a rational firm whose aim is to maximize profit, right, will produce a good up to and including the unit where the marginal revenue you earn from producing and selling a good is equals to the marginal cost of producing the last unit, right? So MR equals to MC, and that is your profit max condition, by the way. Okay. All right. So I hope that answers. If it doesn't fully answer what you're asking, please follow up again. All right. Next, Hansel asks, do we need to draw the graph explaining moral suasion? So assuming, right, Hansel, that your moral suasion objective, right, is to correct consumers' perception. Let's say, okay, depending on how you want to use moral suasion, there are two ways to use moral suasion. If your current situation is your MPB perceived is lower than your MPB actual, and assuming you got no externalities, so MSB equals to MPB actual and MPC equals to MSC, so your private optimum QP is lower than social optimum QS, so you now have a deadweight loss equals to this area. So if you want to use moral suasion to correct information of consumers, right, then you're moving the MPB up to this point, right? Then there's really nothing to draw because it's the same diagram, right? So if you had drawn this in your market failure diagram, in the policy, right, you just describe in words that if the government's moral suasion managed to correct the imperfect information, then the MPB perceived, right, would now be equal to MPB actual. So you bring the perception up to where the correct the actual, then the market outcome just move from QP to QS, right? Or if you want the market outcome move from QP to QP prime, which is equals to QS. So this will be how we explain moral suasion used to correct imperfect information. But if you want to use moral suasion to correct externality, so let's say there is a MSB. So now you have a marginal external benefit. So your QS is here, your QP is here, your deadweight loss is still here. So now what moral suasion does is to convince people to care about third-party benefits. So, and make decision based on third-party benefit. Then we are not moving the MPV curve up. We are jumping, right, from this point to this point. So the decision making criterion changes from a marginalist principle decision making, which is MPB to MPC, to MSB equals to MSC. So what's happening is I've jumped from point A to point B. There's no shift, right? MPB didn't shift. MPB is still where it is. Consumers' private benefit is the same. Now that just that consumer now in making the decision, I will take into account social benefit and social cost rather than just looking at private benefit and private cost. So basically saying that I'm not making the consumer irrational. The consumer is still rational. Right? I go back to the previous slide for a while. So Javen just now asked what is marginalist principle, right? We assume that a rational consumer whose aim is to maximize utility will consume at MPB equal MPC. So what moral suasion is trying to do, right, is to get this rational consumer to change your aim from maximize utility to maximizing social welfare, right? So if you can maximize from maximize utility to maximizing social welfare, then your decision-making criteria change from MPB, MPC to MSB, MSC, and you decide to be at point B without any graph shifting. So to summarize, Hansel, your question, summarize answer to your question, do you need to draw graph explaining moral suasion? No, right? You don't need to draw any new graph. You just refer to the old diagram and describe what's happening only after moral suasion is done. All right, Kirsten, explain how firms in Singapore will be affected by constraints such as having a small domestic market and a lack of resource. So this is a past year A-level exam question, part A, where they ask that in Singapore, we have two main constraints: small domestic market and lack of resource. So R1 is how does a small domestic market affect firms? R2 is explain how lack of resource affect firms. So for domestic market, listen up, question is to explain that the demand is small. If the demand is small, then firms in this country will not be able to enjoy. Firms cannot grow very big. Any given firm cannot grow very big because there's not enough demand to let a firm produce at a large output. So your scope for IEOS is very limited, right? So firms cannot enjoy as much IEOS. Now, there's a second argument you can add on if you want, that for some industries, right, if your MES is small, that means the MES is very low, then the market demand may be enough to support a few firms, but because of small domestic market, only can support a few firms. So this can turn into a situation where firms won't get to enjoy so much EEOS. So external economies of scale may also not be able to enjoy, may not be enjoyed by the firms as well. So there are 2 points here. So lack of IEOS, lack of EEOS. Do you need both points for your R1? Don't need. You only need 1 point. And if it's 1 point, the IEOS point is the more conventional, more obvious point to talk about. So EEOS is an acceptable second point to add on if you want, but it's not really needed. So IEOS is the main point. Then to elaborate on your paragraph, you need to expand and unpack what is IEOS, give some example of IEOS that a larger country can enjoy that Singapore may not get to enjoy. R2, explain how a lack of resource affect firms. A lack of resource here will be going back to a more demand-supply framework to explain a lack of resource translate into higher cost of factor inputs. Higher cost of factor inputs will lead to a higher variable cost of production. So with higher AC and MC curves, this will cause the firm's output to be lower and profit to be higher. So you can draw a diagram to show lack of demand versus R1 as a lower ARMR, lack of resource lead to a higher ACMC. So R1, a firm in a country with high ARMR can produce at a higher output and charge a higher price and enjoy a higher profit. Sorry, let me undo this. And enjoy a higher profit. A firm in a country like Singapore with smaller market share and smaller AR and smaller MR will produce at a lower output level, charge a lower price, and have a lower profit. So they have a smaller profit compared to the firm that is at a higher, compared to a firm with that operates in a country with more market demand. Now then, R2, a firm in a country with an abundance of resources where unit cost of inputs are relatively low, then low average cost and marginal costs are lower, then the firm enjoys a higher level of profit. Then if it's a country like Singapore with shortage of resources or lack of resources, your MC and MC intersection is at a lower point. So you end up charging higher price and your profit is also lower. So this is the profit. So that's how you can compare. Now, we're not saying it's shifting. We're not saying that revenue is falling or average cost or marginal cost is rising. We're saying that comparing firms in countries with smaller market share with bigger market share, comparing firms in countries with lack of resources versus country with abundance of resources. All right, so this is how you can do your R1 and your R2. 2. All right. Could I ask if, of course you could ask, if firms earning subnormal profit can engage in strategies to increase their profits to normal profits? Yes, you can. And you can ask and I can answer. The answer is yes, they can. Firms earning subnormal profits in the short run, assuming they don't shut down yet, right? Then they are still surviving, will ultimately have to shut down in the long run if demand conditions don't improve. Then can a firm try to get themselves out of the shutdown situation in the long run by finding strategies to improve their profits back to normal? Sure, lots of things a firm can do. For example, a firm could product innovate, come out with a better product to win more market share. A firm can also try to do process innovation, come out with a cheaper way of producing goods by developing better technology, right? A firm can also lower the quality of your product by changing to a lower quality raw material. This at the same time is to create, so that lowers costs, but at the same time you create a inferior version of the good. Now, assuming that your fall in demand that caused you to be in subnormal profit is a falling income, right? Then this third strategy is particularly good because by lowering the quality and using cheaper inputs, you are creating an inferior good version of your product that during a recession might actually help boost your demand for your inferior good, so helps you earn more revenue and profit. Example of this will be like how companies make inferior versions of their product. Like for example, Apple makes one time make the iPhone SE, or how branded car companies like Mercedes make a lower end car models, and BMW make a lower end car models, for example, as inferior good. So a lot of car makers do that. A lot of clothing stores do that. Restaurants sometimes also do that. All right, so these are some strategies a firm can use to deal with that means try to raise profits. So either raise revenue or decrease costs, or both. Okay, what are the main graphs? What are the main graphs must you know for firms and decision? All the ARMR curves, ARMR curve, all must know, right? Short run, long run effects, all the curves you need to know. So, and so I have a live stream that I previously recorded on effects or event for firms. If you are free tonight, go and watch the live stream that goes through all the scenarios of the events that you need to be able to analyze and draw for firms. On top of that, what else must you know? Pretty much nothing much. It's just profits. It's basically the ARMR curve of firms, explaining effects or event. Price discrimination don't need to draw. Shutdown don't need to draw. So pretty much just firms diagram, right, for different market structures. All right, how to do MAP? All right, so MAP stands for Market Adjustment Process. It's basically something you do when the market gets out of equilibrium. So of course, we assume that the market was at equilibrium to begin with. So you have a demand and supply intersection. So you have equilibrium. So let's say, right, if you have a event, that somehow lead to increase in demand. So this will cause demand curve to shift to the right. So the first thing you want to do is to say that at the initial price level, P0, there is now a shortage of Q0 prime units. So how to show that at the original price P0, quantity demanded has increased to Q0 prime, while quantity supply remain at Q0. So there's a shortage of Q0 prime. Then next, you will say that this shortage exerts an upward pressure on the price. So you want to bring up this phrase. So there's upward pressure on the price. Then next, this point is very often missed out by students, that assuming no price controls exist for this market, price rises. So upward pressure and actual increase is not the same thing. Upward pressure means there's a tendency for the price to rise. For price to actually rise, there must be no price control that prevents it from rising. If you don't write this idea in orange color, right, in your school exam, your teachers are not going to penalize. Right? They're just going to let it go. So you won't worry about it. If you didn't write, no problem. If you write, looks nicer a little bit, right? Waste a bit more time, but not crucial. The important thing is now price increase. As the price increase, then you need to explain the response of consumers. So you say that as the price increase, right, consumers respond by reducing the amount of the good that they are willing and able to buy in accordance to the law of demand, right? Then at the same time, as the price increase, the quantity supply increase, because according to law of supply, the higher price would incentivize sellers to be more willing able to produce the good to sell. Because of this, now the next point is the shortage becomes smaller, right? Then last point, you can say that, but as long as there is still a shortage, this process will continue. What is this process? The market adjustment process will continue until the market reaches the new equilibrium, E1, right? So this is your new equilibrium, E1, where the price has increased to P1 and the quantity has increased to Q1. So that is the entire market adjustment process that you have to explain. All right, next. Alternative objective of firms other than profit maximization. So there are various alternative objectives. For exam purpose, right, to handle the exam, I just need you to remember three main objectives. This isn't comprehensive. This is just three main objectives to learn for exam. Number one, let's color code this. Blue is profit max. The condition is MR equals to MC. 2, revenue maximization. So or revenue max. Condition is MR equals to 0. And 3, let's use red color. Sales maximization, also known as sales max, is when AR is equals to AC. So to do profit maximization, blue color, MR equals to MC is at this point. So Q0, P0. Please do not forget the AC curve. If you forget the AC curve, then this blue color point is not valid, right? So profit max point require that the firm at least must be earning supernormal or normal profits. Then revenue max, where MR equals to 0, right? Where MR equals to 0, this is where MR curve intersect the horizontal axis. This is the Q1. What price does the firm charge? The firm will charge a price equal to P1 based on the AR curve. Then where is sales max? Sales max is where AC equals to AR. That's Q2. And the price is P2. So this would be the way you illustrate sales max, profit max, and revenue max. For revenue max, for sales max, my mistake. For profit max, you don't need to explain anything except that how it is done. Because the economic theory already suggests that we assume firms aim to maximize profit. However, if you are using revenue max and sales max, you need to provide a circumstance that in which these strategies make sense. Like for example, revenue max. Why might a firm choose revenue max? The conventional answer given by most of your school is to assume that there might be some firm out there whose pricing and output decision are determined by managers who run the company and not by owners who own the company. So the owners entrust the managers to make decisions to run the company. But then these managers, right, may have their own incentive, right, to pursue a revenue maximizing strategy rather than a sales maximizing strategy. This is known as the principal agent problem, where the agent, meaning the managers who represent the owners, whose income, right, are tied to a percentage of the revenues rather than profits. So then their incentive is to maximize revenue rather than maximize profit, right? So that is rationale as to why this might happen. So in the exam, you cannot simply say, oh, revenue max is here. Then you must say, why would that happen? Why would in a country would there be why would there be in some firms where they aim to maximize revenue? Then how about sales? When might sales maximization occur? Then there are several reasons why sales maximization occurs. Sometimes, right, when a firm is introducing a new product in the market and they want consumers to try out their new product, so then they might offer a cheaper price, but one that is enough to at least cover cost of production. So they would want to lose money and they want to sell as many units as possible without losing money. Now, that's actually a very simplistic theoretical viewpoint, but in exam, this is good enough. In the real world, however, right, it's more complicated. There are many firms in the real world, right, who actually willing to even lose money in the short run, right, to maximize sales, to expose many consumers to my product one, right? Just that in the theoretical world, we add a simplifying assumption that the firm at least don't want to lose money, right? So that's why we choose AR equals to AC is the point that can give us the highest level of output without getting into subnormal. All right, so these are the sales max, revenue max, profit max point. Revenue max, sales max cannot just identify, must explain a rationale behind why it could be happening. All right, Qing says, what is there a diagram for market dominance and predatory pricing? Do we have to show supply decrease? Nope, you don't have to show predatory pricing. Market dominance has no, market dominance is just market dominance, just monopoly, downward sloping AR curve, MR curve, that's market dominance, right? Steeper AR, MR curve. But is there a diagram for predatory pricing? Don't have. Right? I know sometimes some teachers want to introduce predatory pricing in a diagram, but you got to think about what predatory pricing is. Predatory pricing is a pricing strategy a firm chooses, right, to lower my price with what intention? With the intention of driving out a rival from the industry. That means I want my rival company to shut down. How do I get them to shut down? The way to get them to shut down, right, is to get them to cannot cover variable costs. So I must price my good low enough such that my rival must match my price, and at that price that they match, right, they cannot cover their variable costs. Then on my graph, how would I ever show the other firm shutdown point? I can't. What? So then there's no meaningful diagram to draw in my graph to show the right price to set. So it's just an arbitrary price I claim that, oh, at this, let's assume this is the price that the rival cannot cover variable costs. Then it's very meaningless to go and draw that diagram, right? So I wouldn't bother with drawing this diagram for predatory pricing. As I said, I know some of your school teachers introduce a diagram, but I totally disagree with the value of drawing it. I don't think it adds a lot of value to the exam. Marginal cost very high, marginal benefit very low in drawing that graph. All right. Anything else? I got 13 minutes left before 6:30. If you cannot think of any questions for now, never mind. Later got any questions, you can still text me and ask, or tomorrow night we'll do another version. I'm thinking 8 p.m. tomorrow night we'll do another live, so you can ask any questions that you need at that point. But HCI people, HCI people got question, please ask tonight. What if tomorrow I see the question and I really don't know how to do? Then chances are, right, Teresa, when a teacher set a question, it is not a question that you cannot do one, right? There is no point in a teachers in school creating a question you don't know how to do. Then you got to remind yourself, this can't be true case. That means I should know how to do this one. I'm just not recognizing what the teacher is asking, right? When the teacher sets a question, they have a intended thing that they are trying to test, and it should be quite similar to how they have been testing. So the first thing you can do, right, is tell yourself, does this question look similar to something I have done before, right? Which question is that in the past year exam would this be similar to? And from there, you can gauge what is the likely thing they're asking. Worst case scenario, if you cannot understand what the question is really asking, right, then use the method that I've always been teaching you all. Rewrite the question out by stripping away all theoretical concept from the question and contextual information, leaving behind only the English sentence structure to figure out what the question is about, right? With your level of intellect, right, that you possess, that allow you to get into a top school like HCI, right, your language ability should be high enough for you to understand what the question is asking. I strongly suspect, right, the reason why you will face a situation where you don't know what they're asking, right, is you are panicking in the exam, right? Rather than you don't know what to do, you're just panicking because the questions suddenly throw you off balance. Then you need to calm yourself down and say, it can't be the case that they set a question that cannot do one, or set a question so hard that nobody understands what the question wants. So I'm just panicking. So calm down, read the question carefully, reinterpret the question from an English point of view. What do I think they're asking? Always fall back upon past year questions and say, what are they modeling after? Okay, so stay calm. And so as why would firms choose to profit satisfies if they can profit maximize? So exactly, and so this is the point I was talking about just now when Teresa was asking this question. Explain alternate objective. So you need to present a reason for why the firm might choose revenue max or sales max. So as I said, if they profit satisfying, right, is like sales max or revenue max. So when they aim for sales max, it might be because it's a short-term strategy. They are trying to introduce a new product. They're trying to get as many consumers to try their product as possible, in the hopes that after consumer try my product, they will like my product, then they will switch over and buy my good, right? So then that is a reason to set a sales max price. So you need to provide a reason. Then for revenue max, as I mentioned just now, the most common reason given by your schools, right, is that the way the business owners pay the managers, right, is tied to a revenue, how much revenue they bring in. So in this kind of situation, the decision maker, which is the managers, which are the managers and not the shareholder, not the business shareholders, right? The business managers would make a decision to maximize revenue because that's what they will be tied into their objective of raising their own income. All right, for the HCI people, whose paper is tomorrow, just remember, stay calm, focus on your skills, all the skills that I've taught you before, right? Whenever you're panicking, fall back upon your skills, right? What is the question type? What is R1? What is R2? What is the structure? What is the paragraph structure? How to do the 3-step paragraph for thesis and antithesis argument? How to do IEV? How to do EV? All right, 7 more minutes. Any more questions? Quickly ask. But as I said, if you got nothing to ask at the moment, always can text me and ask more questions. Okay, but if you got nothing else, you can log off already. I see still got 7 people online. I wonder if I can see who you are. Live viewers. I cannot see the live viewers. Okay, also stay calm. The teachers are not out to kill you one, right? They didn't set a promo exam to fail you, right? They set a promo exam to assess whether you have learned well the stuff that you are meant to have learned well, right? So the objective is not to create a test so hard that you all fail. That's not the point of the exam. And your teachers are not mean people. they have a job to do, assess whether you have learned well. So they can't be testing you some weird stuff. How do you use PPC in question? Very rarely in microecons, Chelsea, do we use PPC, except in the year 2023. Let me check. Give me a moment, Chelsea. Chelsea, do you have your 25-year series? If you have your 25-year series for market failure, can you open that 25-year series file? And let me check which year is this. Should be 2023 ba. One moment, I'm opening the file. Yeah, 2023 question 1. Explain how PPC can be used to show concepts of underutilization of economic resources and opportunity costs. So to show underutilization of resources, right? So you're basically saying that if an economy is operating at point A, which is a point inside the PPC, so if I have good Y on the vertical axis and good X on the horizontal axis, it's producing Y not amount of good Y and X not amount of good X. This shows underutilization of resources because the country is able to increase the amount of good X to X1 without giving up any of the units of good Y. Or the country can go to Y1. That means the firm can move to point B or point C, where it now has more Y without giving up X. Or the firm can move to any point between point C and point B, right, where you can have more of both goods. So this suggests that the economy had idle resources at point A. So there are idle resources at point A, indicating that the economy is underutilizing its resources. Then second part is, how does the PBC show that opportunity cost? So if the economy, now let's choose a different point A. If the economy is at point A and wants to move to point B, then in order to produce more of good X, the only way this can happen is that we must sacrifice some of more of good X must involve sacrificing amount of good Y produced, because we got no more spare resources. We have to give up some resources, give up some units of good Y to free up the resources to make more units of good X. So from X0 to X1, that increase in extra amount of good X produced requires us to give up a certain amount of good Y. And how much good Y? This vertical distance, why not Y1, is the opportunity cost of producing extra good X. So the way to use PPC is to show underutilizing of scarce resources as well as to show opportunity cost. That's how the exams can test you. And an example is the 2023 question 1 at A level. All right, Qing Ying. Do firms only do profit maximization objective in the long run? No, not really. Firms can firms can also choose satisfying profit in the long run, just not common, but they can also be pursuing profit satisfying. So especially if it's like a social enterprise, for example, right, that is aiming not just for profit, but aiming to achieve two objectives, right? On one hand, they want to make profits. On the other hand, the business owner is also trying to advance some the social goal that the business owners care about, right? So that is can be in the long run. All right, last 1 more minute. At 6:30, my time is up. My car will turn back into a pumpkin, and my tires will become 4 miles. All right, so I'm going to think on the assumption that there's no more questions. Then tomorrow, for those non-DHS people, CJC people, YI people, we will have another session at, and NY people as well, another session at 8 p.m. tomorrow night. If you've got any questions, you can accumulate until then and ask. If you urgently want to ask, you can just WhatsApp me and ask. Okay, then we'll stop here for today, and good luck, HCI, for the exam. See you.